Thank you all for being here today. We're really glad you came. With this, I would like to invite all of you to go grab some cookies and snacks that we have prepared for you, because it's always more fun to crunch while listening to useful debaters' speeches. With this, I also want to greet everyone who's watching us here today virtually, or I guess from Manasseh's phone here. So, hello everyone watching. We're so pleased to have you here with us today. And first things first, we're going to announce our first event of the day. The first event of the day is going to be opening. Okay, the first event is going to be IPDA. IPDA stands for International Public Debate Association, and it's a one-on-one type of debate where we will have two of our beautiful debaters, Avery over there, and with us are going to be debating some of the topics that we pre-prepared. Those two beautiful debaters will have 30 minutes of preparations for the topic that we're going to be showcasing on the board. We'll have multiple types of topics. They're going to be policy, value topics, fact topics, and all of them are supposed to be in great fun, all of them. So now I'm going to be inviting Madeline and Avery to come and join us. And we're going to see which side they're going to be in. Avery, since you're an upperclassman, you have a choice to choose. Are you going to be heads or tails? I'll guess. Okay. Flip it now. Well, I cannot flip it either, so I guess. Let's see. Let's see. Oh no. Okay, Avery.
Is that tails?
I don't know. It's tails. Tails, everybody. You choose tails?
Yeah.
What are you going to be today?
Okay, I'll take negation.
Take negation. So therefore, we have Madeline with us here today on the side of the affirmation and Avery on the side of the negation. Now, with this, we're going to be reviewing some of the topics. These are all meant to be educational and provide some of the fun stuff that is pretty much relevant in the world today.
Oh, shoot.
Let's do fun. I'll spare. Okay, great. Today we're going to be debating the resolution number 5, which is going to be pumpkin spice lattes are better than eggnog lattes. Isn't that fun, you guys? I think this is going to be an incredible debate. And we're going to give a few moments for our debaters to collect their prep team. But with this, the next event is also going to be incredibly entertaining. And while our debaters prepare their cases for the conclusion of the night, we're going to be inviting our duo, which is going to be a great and fun. Duo is an event where two of the people take a bunch of interesting literature and combine it and to create a program on the topic of their choosing. They get to interpret multiple different characters and just overall show us the excellence in their play as well as in their speech abilities. So please welcome Manasseh and Ahmed.
Ladies and gentlemen, America is under attack, not just from beyond the borders, but from within. Our jobs are disappearing. Our traditions are crumbling. If we do not act now, if we do not stand strong, the America you know, the America you love, will vanish forever. If we do not elect leadership strong enough to face these dangers, everything. Before fear, we lost.
My opponent paints a picture of doom because fear is easier to tell than the truth. Fear shuts down the conversation. It convinces you to trade your freedom for the illusion of safety. But leadership is not about scaring people into submission. True leadership is about facing challenges with courage, not panic. See, I believe in solutions, not scary tactics.
I will show you fear.
In a handful of dust,
In a forest full of burnt pine cones, in a factory full of rust,
and a seafloor full of bleached
in
coral,
a bag full of infant
in
bones.
a beach full of birds soaked in oil.
I will show you
Fear. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book.
the rustling in the dark, the shadow in the trees. We were built with some fear. It kept us alive.
Somewhere along the way, it stopped being a warning. It became a weapon.
You've seen it on the news, in politics, plastered across headlines in capital letters, kept there shouting, "Be afraid!" Throughout history, fear has been used as a weapon to gain political advantage. But today, it's evolved into something much bigger. A force that shapes not just our elections, but our everyday decisions, our social interactions, and even our national discourse.
According to a 2024 poll by Georgetown Institute of Politics, it found that more than 85% of voters cite fear and anxiety about the future to be the main driver for the political decisions that they make.
Fear was our life because it's profitable. Politicians can vote with it, media thrives on the clicks it brings, and loud misinformation drowns out quiet expertise. A John Hopkins poll found that 45% of voters see their polling party as downright evil.
Fear makes us act irrationally and out of character. We must always be intentional to pursue truth and hope at such tumultuous times.
Through the poetry Fear by Marjorie Parsons and Fear Mongering by Francis Duggan, the campaign of panic by Brenton Knives and Keep Them Afraid by H. Blazing, we see fear mongering and public panic as the greatest threats in our ability to understand one another, to engage in civil discourse, to protect democracy itself.
Fear not a program.
Because the only thing you have to fear is fear itself.
Let's start in 1692.
The trials just began.
Rumors being spread around.
You'll cause a disturbance, or you may be
A witch!
a witch.
I'm scared.
The people are talking around town.
They looked at me today with eyes of fire.
They say you flew in the night. My mother said stay away. The devil wears familiar faces.
And do I wear his face? Look at me, do I?
I don't know what's real anymore.
Fear makes a liar of us all.
The economy? Let me tell you what's coming. If my opponent takes power, the markets will collapse. Criminals will run the streets. And when the banks shut their doors and the shelves go empty, don't say I didn't warn you.
That isn't a plan. That is a nightmare bedtime story. You know, you can terrify people with words, but fear doesn't feed families. Fear doesn't create jobs. Fear never builds bridges.
You see, fear is the truth. You aren't paying attention.
Or perhaps if you're afraid, you're not thinking clearly. A frightened nation is a nation under control. It is the oldest trick in the book. Keep people afraid, and they will follow you everywhere. But I will show you fear.
The fear of torture
Suffering and death.
and the fear of terror we hear of every day.
And it's sad to think that people do believe them and believe every word that they have to say.
Take for instance the 1950s.
The enemy walks among us, your neighbor,
Your teacher,
your grocer,
the Soviet Union's crossing borders.
and the scare is real. But he just lent me his law.
What else might he lend you? A ideology, a question?
Wrong to ask questions.
It is dangerous. It's not safe. They could be listening.
Of course they are. I mean, everyone's a suspect nowadays. Say the word union and suddenly you're Stalin's right-hand man.
They took someone in for less. He lent someone a book,
What am I supposed to do? Nod and smile while they feed us slice and call it freedom?
Yes. And keep your job, your family, and your name safe.
What kind of country is this?
I will show you fear.
In the eyes of a mother in a tent.
In the eyes of a seal on a shrinking ice
In
floe.
the eyes of a migrant on a jungle
In
train.
the eyes of a gazelle at a dry warming hole.
Duck and cover!
I will obey
Or be consumed by the flash!
national security. The enemy is already here. Just walk among us. Blind destruction. Every stranger could be a threat. Every shadow could be the enemy. We are apart now for even 1 second. The result will be catastrophe.
There it is again. Be afraid of everyone. Trust no one and hand all of your power to me. That is not security. That is surrender. My opponent doesn't want you to see people. Helpers, workers, teachers. My opponent wants you to see monsters. But I will show you fear.
And how to overcome.
When day after day after day, 24/7, millions in the streets shout, never again.
For anyone.
Never again.
Anywhere.
Never again.
Ever.
Truth, community, and courage can conquer fear.
Trust us.
Give us your rights, or we'll keep them safe. It's the early 2000s.
Surveillance is on the rise.
They're coming for your jobs,
Your kid,
your God,
click,
scrolls,
obey,
social media age.
and everything is a click of a button.
My feed is a war zone. Every post is a sign.
Like you just saw the
Have you
apocalypse.
seen this post that's been going around?
Again, the same story has been putting on for 10 years. They just repackaged it with a new name and scarier filter.
But it looks so real, and people are warning each other in the
And
comments section.
yesterday, they were saying that vaccines have microchips and that the government is controlling the weather. Fear is the currency now. You spread it, you win the attention. You are naive. You want to sing songs while the wolves circle.
No. I want to build a nation where the wolves don't get to rule over the sheep, where people don't trade their liberty for false promises of security. I say this. Do not fear the future. Fear will bind you, and divide you. Hope, however, can guide us. Hope is not naivete. Hope is not a weakness. Hope is the courage to build while others choose to only destroy. You offer fear because fear is easy. I offer hope because hope is necessary.
Thank you, Manasseh and Ahmed, for this great performance of duo interpretation. Did you like it, guys? Woo! The second event that we would like to showcase is going to be a little bit different. This type of event is a limited preparation event. When within this event, the speaker is going to get quotations, out of which he will choose one to interpret, and the person is going to only have 7 minutes in total in order to come up with a cohesive speech prep included. With this, I would like to welcome Owen in order to show us what this means. And of course, for you guys, we're also going to be translating quotations on the board. Thank you, Ellie, for being our timekeeper today and gracefully giving Owen our time notes. And with this, I will leave you to read.
I use a website which I am rather embarrassed to admit, Reddit. It is a website notorious for trolls and people who simply can't take things seriously or have outrageous takes that are so far out there, you can't believe someone would say that. And around 4 to 5-ish years ago, I was almost certainly one of those people. Ironically, it wasn't until when scrolling Reddit I got into another argument, I swear I changed, wherein I actually started to learn something about an issue I hadn't really thought about. This brings me to today's quotation. One of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. We can break this down to see what it is calling us to do is to actually try to listen to one another and see just the respect and community that comes out of that. To fully demonstrate this, we're going to go to the philosophical side of this. I can pronounce words, I swear. Move on to a fictional demonstration, and finally discuss the real-world example in the realms of politics. Well, let's start this off by discussing the philosophical side behind this argument, primarily with some First Amendment theory. There's a theorist by the name of Thomas Emerson who broke down First Amendment theory into 4 key aspects. But the one we're going to focus on today is that of finding the truth. Emerson argued that, yes, there are going to be a lot of bad ideas thrown out there into the wayside, but ultimately the goal of having free speech is to listen to one another. There will be ideas that you disagree with ultimately, but when it comes down to it, it's having all these ideas, these speeches, these people talking that brings out the truth in society, that ultimately allows people to come together and recognize the reality of the situation. But of course, that all falls apart if we don't listen to one another. People can say as much as they would like, but if we're not willing to listen to one another, to what other people actually have to say, then it ultimately doesn't matter. People won't change their beliefs, and people won't find that truth. Now, having gone through the philosophical side, let's see an application of this through the story of Tintin. If you don't know, Tintin is a 1920s Belgian comic series, but we're not focused on Tintin itself. Rather, we're focused on its author, a man by the name of George Remy. George Remy had a controversial past. See, his first 2 books, Tintin in the Congo and Tintin in the Land of Soviets, were notoriously racist and filled with propaganda. However, George Remy was heavily influenced by the people around him, a large conservative bloc that was influencing his motives. It wasn't until people started to reach out to him, saying, hey, you're doing this wrong. This isn't true. They started to change his mind. Ultimately, he would boldly switch his opinions when he met one student by the name of Chang, who helped show him that many of his beliefs, especially his beliefs around Japan and China, which he was writing about at the time, were fundamentally wrong. This would lead him becoming one of the most prolific cartoonists of all time, with cartoons that say far more than is actually on the page, giving us a deeper dive into the history and politics of the time. But if it wasn't for his ability to listen in order to see this respect for other people, then he would have that ultimate change. So having gone through a philosophical and a fictional historical example, let's apply it to the modern day, primarily within the political realm. You should not need me to tell you that right now we are in a very polarized state of America. And largely it's because many people simply won't listen to one another. I've seen a large amount of political debate between presidents and Congress people, and the amount of times it evolves into, well, I'm a better golfer than you, or some nonsense or fear-mongering, as brought up by a wonderful duo. Oftentimes, it feels like these politicians are talking past each other. They're talking only to their constituency and not focusing on actually trying to have a helpful conversation. A conversation that helps to find that truth Emerson talks about. A conversation that helps to change our opinions, much like George Remy did, in order to become a better society. What we see from here is that fundamentally, one of the largest issues in America is we are not willing to listen to one another. We do not respect our opponents, and therefore we do not take in their ideas, and we do not fully come around within this society to fully accept what the truth is or to change our perspectives. Around 4 to 5 years ago, I was staunchly conservative, and I mean very conservative. However, it wasn't until a Reddit post that brought up some facts and logic that I started to question my beliefs, started to do some research on my own, ultimately bring me to where I am today, having listened to the other side and changed many of my beliefs around that because, quite simply, I learned to respect people on both sides of the aisle. There are things on both sides I agree and disagree with, but fundamentally, one of the core lessons I hope you take away from this is see that today's quotation, one of the most sincere forms of respect, is actually listening to what one another has to say to be fundamentally true. We see this in philosophy, in history, and within politics, and we need it now more than ever.
Came up with all of that in 30 seconds. Isn't that impressive? Thank you. With this, we're going to be moving on into another round of speeches that we do on our debate team. This is going to be a platform prepared speech, and Ellie is going to be representing one of the most fun talk speeches that we have on the circuit, which is called After Dinner Speak. And talking about dinners, we still have those snacks over there. But the after dinner speaking actually involves using humor in order to lighten up and bring to our attention some of the serious topics and even persuade us to change something within our habits. So let's please welcome Ellie. Everyone ready? Awesome. I went to my mom's house last week because I'm a broke college student and needed a snack. Something nostalgic, healing. I go to the kitchen. Picture me, eyes sparkling, mouth already watering, ready to grab anything and everything. I spot a cookie tin. Actual tears of joy pour from my eyes. I grasp the lid of the tin and pull it up, and then bam! A seam ripper and a blood oath. What is that? Who leads someone on like that? I just wanted some cookies. Instead, I got trauma and a tetanus risk. Betrayal tastes bitter. And honestly, tampons are kind of like that cookie tin. Soft pastels promising comfort, but inside, hidden risks and heavy metals nobody warned you about. According to the Women's Voice of the World in 2024, 84% of women said they had no idea what was in their menstrual products. So today, we're changing that. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but I don't use tampons, I have rights. You care about people who do. Your friends, your sisters, your coworkers, partners, or future partners. And me, if nothing else, you care about me, right? Right? But let's be honest, if tampons are this terrible and nobody's saying anything because society trained them to just deal with it, that's not just a women's issue. That's a human one. So today, we'll unwrap some harms, insert ourselves into the effects, and hopefully change our tampon habits after some solutions. But first, let's unwrap some harms by looking at the materials used in tampons and the cost and marketing strategies that keep us buying them. First, the materials used in tampons. What exactly are we putting in our bodies every month? Call me old-fashioned, but if it's going inside me, I want to know. At least buy me dinner. UC Berkeley School of Public Health in 2024 conducted a study where they found 16 different metals in tampons, including lead, arsenic, and cadmium. Non-organic brands had more arsenic, organic ones more lead. So, spoiler alert, there's no truly safe option. Before we even get into the health effects,
Just think about how disturbing that is. You wouldn't put a lead straw in your Starbucks drink. Well, maybe you would, but that's a different issue. Maybe all the metals in tampons explains why it's always so hard for me to get one in. I wasn't just struggling. My body's own personal tiny metal detector was screaming, "Girl, what are you doing?" And I, like a true honor student with no survival instinct, ignored her. Girl boss, gaslight, gatekeep, gynecology. Second, the cost and marketing strategies that keep us buying them. Tampons aren't just toxic. They're financially exploitative. The average menstruator. I hardly know. Spend $18,000 on menstrual products over a lifetime. That's enough for a down payment on a house. Well, maybe not in this economy, but think of how many down payments our great-great-grandmas could have made. Well, if they had any rights. They're not just expensive, though. They're marketed as the ultimate symbol of period control. You can swim, you can wear white jeans, you can do gymnastics on a horse. Like, be so for real. She should be horizontal with a vengeance and a heating pad. They tell us that tampons are sterile and trustworthy. So was the Titanic, right up until it hit the iceberg. And you know, speaking of things that are in the sea, did you know there's a theory that SpongeBob is a tampon? Who lives in the vagina of a young teen, SpongeBob! Yes! A turbot in yellow and Boris disease, SpongeBob! Now, if you're wondering, who let the tampon industry get away with this? Look no further than Big Daddy Government. He's been suspiciously quiet for a guy who likes to regulate everything else we do with our bodies. So with an understanding of the harms, let's go ahead and get into the effects. By first taking a look at the health effect and the environment. But first, the health effect. Remember those metals, lead, arsenic, cadmium? Yeah, they're linked to cancer, diabetes, infertility, and dementia. The American Cancer Society in 2023 made it absolutely clear. No amount of lead or arsenic is safe in the human body. And yet, that same study found that in a single tampon, there were 120 parts per billion of lead. That's 24 times higher than the US limit for bottled water. But here's the worst part. Modern tampons came out in the 1930s, which means we've gone a lot of years without really knowing what we're putting in our bodies. You know what they did study though? Ellen Farm Ollie, who became the first cow to fly in an airplane. She was also the first cow to be milked mid-flight. A cow giving in-flight beverage service? Groundbreaking. But researching what's in a tampon? Apparently not on the agenda. If your shampoo bottle said, may cause organ failure, you toss it. Tampons say that, and we're like, it's lavender scented. The CDC in the 1970s linked the usage of tampons to toxic shock syndrome, finding that tampon users were 18 times more likely to develop it than non-tampon users. And those who use super absorbent tampons face almost double the risk. They say, don't ignore red flags. Tampons are red flags, literally. Second, the environmental effects. If I can't convince you of the health effects, there's sea turtles who need to be saved. I'm looking at you, hippies. The National Geographic in May of 2024 tells us that tampons are made of 90% plastic. In the US alone, 7 billion tampons are thrown away annually, most ending up in landfills, taking 500 to 800 years to decompose. My dad left me. But you know what never does? A plastic tampon! So, at least someone is consistent. What we need to remember is that the earth is not your ex. It actually remembers everything you've dumped into it. Finally, we'll hopefully change our tampon habits after some solutions. First, switch to reusables. And second, talk about it. First, switch to reusables. It's time to swipe right on something that actually cares about us. Because safer, more sustainable options already exist. We just haven't been taught to trust them. Period underwear from Period Co. costs anywhere between $9 and $12. The Halo menstrual pod costs $8. And from a variety of companies, the menstrual cup on average costs about $30. The Vancouver Islands Women Clinic in 2021 says that because menstrual cups collect fluid rather than absorb it, it significantly reduces the risk of bacterial growth and therefore reduces the risk of toxic shock syndrome. And the German Institute of Health in 2024 tells us that there have only ever been 2 documented cases of toxic shock syndrome that have ever been linked to the usage of menstrual cups, both involving extreme misuse, like wearing one for 7 days straight. The wonderful thing about these products is that they last a long time. The menstrual cup can last up to 10 years, which is good, because I know you've been holding on to toxic things way longer. So with the savings of up to $4,500 just over that decade alone, that's enough savings to make those "I've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty" finally hang up. Second, talk about it. One of the most overlooked but also simplest solutions is just to normalize the conversation. It's as easy to remember as I cup, I confront unfair practices, I see UP. To make that conversation a little bit easier, I've got stickers. Because honestly, a little humor can start the most important conversations. When we talk openly about periods, from products to challenges, we create a realm of empathy, understanding, and support at a time that we desperately need it. Today, we unwrapped some harms, inserted ourselves into the effects, and hopefully changed our tampon habits after some solutions. And we saw that that cookie tin might not be so different from tampons. In fact, it might even be safer than what we're putting in our bodies. I may not have had a dad to look out for me, but now I'm looking out for all of us because the silence around tampons has gone on too long. Thank you to Ellie for giving us this presentation. Once again, get the stickers, get the snacks, and with this, we see that our debaters have returned. Let's give her a round of applause. You want us to try it instead of keeping this up? On board? Yeah. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Everyone's ready? Then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Today, I stand in firm affirmation of the resolution that pumpkin spice lattes are better than eggnog lattes. Now today, we're going to be viewing this as a value round with the values of enjoyment. So looking at how well pumpkin spice lattes or eggnog latte provide us some enjoyment. Now, next, we're going to be going on to our weighing mechanism, which is on balance. All this simply means is when you're looking at it, which one do you see to be true more often than not? What do you believe to be true 51% of the time? Now, with that out of the way, let's get into some definitions. Starting first with the definition of a pumpkin spice latte. Now I know what you're thinking. I already know what that is. But just for clarification, a pumpkin spice latte is a sweet, milky coffee drink that is flavored with pumpkin spice. Additionally, an eggnog latte is the same, just flavored with eggnog, or often with steamed eggnog. So with that out of the way, we're also going to look at this through the scope of the United States, so particularly looking at sales and popularity just in the US. Now let's go into our first contention, starting with popularity. Subpoint A of the internet. It's pretty well known that pumpkin spice lattes are an internet phenomenon. In fact, when you go to post that selfie and you post with that coffee drink, you're more likely to use that hashtag pumpkin spice latte rather than hashtag eggnog latte. That's not an internet phenomenon. Let's be so for real. According to Soli Coffee in 2024, hashtag pumpkin spice latte has millions of posts, while hashtag eggnog latte has only a few thousand. So we can see that when it comes to enjoyment, when people are enjoying pumpkin spice lattes on the internet, they're enjoying it far more than these eggnog lattes. Additionally, according to Starbucks.com, there is an official pumpkin spice latte day. In fact, it falls around somewhere between the end of August to early of September. However, according to the same source, there's no eggnog latte day. There's none of that. ESO day. Additionally, according to NBC News, first introduced in 2003, the PSL, or the pumpkin spice latte, has become Starbucks' most popular seasonal beverage ever. So we can see that when it comes to Starbucks and people going to buy these drinks, they're more likely to enjoy a pumpkin spice latte. Now let's go to our contention 1 subpoint B of sales, the economy. According to Nelson IQ, as of August of 2025, pumpkin spice flavored drinks in the US topped $1.1 billion in sales as of 2025. $1.1 billion, which is bigger than the GDP of some small nations. Pumpkin spice lattes should just become their own nation at this point. But we can see that eggnog lattes just don't have the same effect. They don't have nearly as many sales. In fact, according to the tasting table as of 2025, Starbucks discontinued the eggnog latte, not once, but twice, because it wasn't popular, was difficult to make, and eggnog is just expensive to acquire. It was discontinued for 5 years, from 2020 to now 2025, where it was just reintroduced this year. Additionally, it was also discontinued back in 2014 for a year or two because of the low amount of sales. Not nearly comparable to that $1.1 billion from the pumpkin spice empire. Now let's go to our contention 2 of taste. Taste. There's just something about that pumpkin spice latte that makes people enjoy it so much more. In fact, according to a food scientist as of NPR in 2025, there are 4 compounds in pumpkin spice that are also found in things like Coca-Cola that give that nostalgic taste when you experience this drink. This is a compound that is not found in eggnog lattes, which is why that pumpkin spice has a huge cult following. Additionally, according to the University of Pennsylvania, the parts of the brain that process odors are limited to emotions, and the pumpkin spice latte scent triggers a warm feeling and nostalgia, which increases your enjoyment. So we can see that these researchers are finding that there's something unique about pumpkin spice that gives us so much more enjoyment. Thank you. And I now stand ready for any questions.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and start that time. Now, thank you for that wonderful speech, Madeline. I just have a couple of questions for you. So my first question is, how can something about enjoyment, which was the value presented, be inherently better?
When something is enjoyed a lot more, then we can see that, especially when it comes to food and drinks, when you're enjoying something, you buy it more. You want to see it presented on the internet. And so that makes it better because you're enjoying it better.
Right. I actually have a follow-up to that. So talking about like it being sold and stuff like that, how long are the pumpkin spice lattes offered to be sold and bought?
Usually till about pumpkin spice latte day, to I presume to about Christmas time-ish. I don't have an exact number on when it ends, but it is longer than eggnog lattes, which usually start around December.
Okay, yeah, because they're sold longer than eggnog lattes, could that contribute then to the amount of money being spent more or the more $1 million they talk?
Sure. So because they're offered a lot more, that means that it's more time for them to be sold, which means that Starbucks and other coffee companies realize they need to be over a longer time because more people want to buy them.
Right. And who primarily sells pumpkin spice lattes?
Well, Starbucks is probably one of the biggest, is the biggest coffee company in the United States, so we can go with that.
Okay, and then what is the average cost of a pumpkin spice latte?
I don't have an exact number on the exact cost differences, but we can see that people buy them more often, so it does not seem to matter much.
Okay, yeah. Do you think it's more expensive than a traditional latte?
Probably, if it has additional flavoring.
Right, absolutely. Okay, then tell me about those flavorings. What are the ingredients in these pumpkin spice lattes?
I don't have all the ingredients, but I do have those 4 compounds that help make the taste a little bit better, which is cinematic aldehydes, eugenol, sabine, and vanilla.
That's okay. Okay, is there pumpkin in the pumpkin spice latte?
I don't know if there's little bits of pumpkin. They have some sort of flavoring that's been
Okay,
extracted.
yeah, but there isn't much like real pumpkin in a pumpkin spice latte.
I mean, I don't know exactly how they make
Right.
pumpkin, but sure, maybe not.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, awesome. If everyone's ready, I'll go ahead and start my time now. First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here today. It's an honor to get to know what we do. It's super fun, and it's always a pleasure to be able to meet Madeline. With this, I stand in firm negation of the resolution that pumpkin spice lattes are better than eggnog lattes. With this, in this speech, I'm going to be going over my own arguments on the negation side of the flow, and then moving over to touch on the affirmative arguments. However, before I get into my first speech, I would like to say that I agree with my opponent's topic case. I agree with things such as that this can be a value round. We can look at the value of enjoyment, and I also agree with the weighing mechanism of on balance and the scope that my opponent offered of looking specifically at the United States. So with the understanding of this, let's look at some of the negation arguments. My first argument is going to be pumpkin spice cons. Again, pumpkin spice cons. Subpoint A is going to be talking about the specific cost of these lattes. As you saw me ask in cross-examination, I asked my opponent what the average cost of these lattes are. What we're going to see is that on average, they are more expensive than general lattes and more expensive than the iconic eggnog latte, which I'm going to talk about. According to Yahoo Creators in 2025, they say that pumpkin spice lattes can be 21% to 25% more expensive than an average latte. This is going to be about $7.25 for one of your pumpkin spice lattes. Whereas a normal latte can be something such as $5.95. So we look at this idea of the cost, we can see if we look at it through the lens of enjoyment, not everyone is able to enjoy these lattes every single day. You can't always spend $7.25 on these lattes, and this is one of the ways that we see that they are not inherently better. Now, let's look at my subpoint B, which is going to be talking about the flavor profile. According to Forbes in 2024, they say that pumpkin spice lattes actually have no pumpkin. As we see, I found cross-examination, I put it listed some of the almost sounding dangerous ingredients that we're putting in pumpkin spice lattes. However, what is not on this list is actual pumpkin. According to Starbucks, since 2025, they only put about 2% of real pumpkin puree in their pumpkin spice lattes. This means that to actually create the flavor profile, they're using things such as those ingredients my opponent talked about, and also a high profile of sugars. This means that according to CNN in 2023, this says that when you're craving a pumpkin spice latte, you're not craving the non-existent pumpkin, you're craving a manufactured spice blended with intense amounts of sugar. Now, this leads me then to my subpoint C, which is going to be looking at the health. Pumpkin spice lattes are not going to be good for your health, and that means they're not going to be good for you to enjoy, especially physically and on your body. According to Healthline in 2023, they say that pumpkin spice lattes have high added sugar and processed ingredients. Again, because they don't have actual pumpkin, that means to create that flavor, they have to use a lot of processed ingredients. This means that on average, a pumpkin spice latte is going to have 50 grams of sugar, which is more than a recommended amount that you have in a day. Versus if we look at something such as the eggnog latte, it is going to have comparatively 42 grams of sugar. Maybe not as much as you should be having, but still comparatively less than a pumpkin spice latte. So now that we understand the cons of these pumpkin spice lattes, let's move on to my second contention, which is going to be saying that they are equal. My opponent's burden is to show that pumpkin spice lattes are better than eggnog lattes. However, as a negation, what we can also see is that they are equal. As Starbucks says themselves, neither are inherently better. The choice depends on personal preference of flavor. Both of these are seasonal drinks, and not one is inherently better. Just because someone might like pumpkin spice lattes and someone might like eggnog lattes, that doesn't mean that they're inherently better. They have similar flavor profiles, actually, and again, with them both being seasonal drinks, one is not inherently better than the other. Furthermore, we can see according to The Kitchen, which did a poll from yesterday, they say that the votes between a pumpkin spice latte and an eggnog latte were actually split down the middle. With this, we can see that one is not inherently better than the other. So with the understanding of the negation case, let's move over to talk about the affirmative arguments that my opponent gave in their first speech. My opponent's first point is this idea of popularity. So point A, they talk about internet and the iconic pumpkin spice latte hashtag. My opponent also talks about this idea that then there's no eggnog latte hashtag, no day, and how pumpkin spice is going to be the most popular beverage. So point B, they talk about sales. They talk about this 1.1 billion and how Starbucks has discontinued the eggnog latte in some of their sales. However, I'm going to group my response to both of these with one argument, and that's going to be talking about from the takeout November 10th, 2025, that this is because of the amount of time the pumpkin spice lattes are offered contributed then to the eggnog lattes. There is going to be more sales of something if you're able to buy that more often. Eggnog lattes are traditionally only offered in the month of December, so you can only get your eggnog latte in December. Whereas pumpkin spice lattes, this year, Starbucks actually introduced them in August. And they lasted until the end of November. So if something is offered longer, this means that people inherently are going to have more access to it, and this is going to be what is contributing to their sales. This doesn't mean that it's inherently better. It just means that people are able to buy it more often. So there is going to be an increase in the sales. Then my opponent's second contention, they talk about this idea of taste. However, let's look back to that CNN quote that I gave. They say that this taste, when you're actually craving a pumpkin spice latte, you're not craving that taste. You're actually craving a manufactured spice blended with intense amounts of sugar. Again, something I want to hammer on is that pumpkin spice lattes aren't actually pumpkin. Eggnog lattes, however, do have eggnog and do have that value. So for these reasons, and with that value that we look at through enjoyment, we can see that because pumpkin spice lattes has these cons with the cost, the flavor, and the health, and because we can't say that one is inherently better than the other based on that value of enjoyment, we can see that negation is going to win and that pumpkin spice lattes are not better than eggnog lattes.
Thank you so much for your speech. As you know, I just have a couple of questions for you. So first of all, in your contention 1, subpoint A, you talked a bit about how pumpkin spice lattes are more expensive than regular latte.
Yeah.
How much is the average cost of an eggnog latte?
Yeah, so as I talked about, they also have the average cost of $5.95 versus the $7.25 for the pumpkin spice latte.
Okay, so an eggnog latte costs the same as a normal latte?
On average, it fluctuates, but that was the average that I found, including the eggnog lattes.
Okay, next, so you talked about in your contention 1 subpoint B about how there's no actual pumpkin and it's just sugar.
Right.
How much sugar is in these eggnog lattes?
Yeah, so there's 50 grams of sugar in a pumpkin spice latte and 42 grams in an eggnog latte, which
Right.
should be less probably, but it's still less than the pumpkin spice latte. So we'll take what we can.
Okay, perfect. Let's see here. You talked about in your contention 1, your contention 2
Right.
about how they're equal, how they're both seasonal drinks. But do you agree that if one has a longer period of time, then that means a business is going to prioritize that drink?
Sure, they might prioritize it, but that doesn't mean that it's better just because they're prioritizing one. They could also then prioritize the eggnog lattes too, and they would probably see that increase in sales and revenue that they're looking for.
Then how come they aren't making this eggnog latte be a longer period of time if it
Right.
would have those same sales?
Right. I can't speak for Starbucks.
Okay, perfect. So let's see. Next, you talked about, again, just on this idea of more time offered
Yeah.
is going to automatically equal more sales. So do you have a piece of evidence that states that if the eggnog latte was offered through August, that it would have more sales?
Let me see. Yes, so that was from the takeout November 10th of 2025. This talked about how some people contribute the success of pumpkin spice latte to the amount of time they have. And they say if it was restricted like the eggnog latte, they would probably have that same numbers.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yes.
That's all the time I have. Thank you. Okay. This is going to be a quick speech, so let's just jump right into it. So starting first, we're going to address some of the points that my opponent has made on their own case and then going back to my own case. So starting first, with my opponent's contention 1 subpoint A, they talked about the expensiveness. They say that pumpkin spice lattes are slightly more expensive than eggnog lattes, and so that does not necessarily make the pumpkin spice or the eggnog latte better. However, we can see that people are still choosing to purchase the pumpkin spice latte more. Even if there is a slightly higher price by a couple of dollars or so, people are still going out to choose to buy those items. That's why we see that high number of sales. So even if it is a little bit more expensive, it still makes it worth it because of that enjoyment that you get from the pumpkin spice latte. And people we see are willing to make that $1 sacrifice. Now, in this point, my opponent says some people can't afford to get a pumpkin spice latte every day. I 100% agree. This isn't about every day, but when you choose to grab that eggnog or pumpkin spice latte, more often than not, people will grab that pumpkin spice latte even if it costs just a little bit more. Now, next, in my opponent's contention 1, subpoint B and C, they talk about a bit, combining these, they're talking a bit about how pumpkin spice does not actually have a lot of pumpkin in it, and it's just a lot of sugar. Again, my opponent's own evidence has shown you that eggnog has a lot of sugar too. They're both very sugary drinks. And that 8 grams of sugar is not really that significant. When it comes to enjoyment, yes, it's sugary, but people enjoy sugar. That's just a fact of life. And so when they're enjoying that pumpkin spice latte, they're enjoying that little bit of extra sugar, and that leads to their aspect of enjoyment. Now, next, my opponent has said in their contention 2 about how both are seasonal drinks, and that doesn't make, just because they have similar taste profiles, that doesn't mean that one is inherently better than the other. However, we can see that we'll show throughout that my case as well, that there is one that is inherently better because of that aspect of enjoyment. Yes, they're both seasonal drinks, but one has a dedicated pumpkin spice latte day. It has millions of hashtags on social media while one only has a few thousand. That's showing that people are enjoying it more, which does make one better. Now, next, responding to my case of my contention 1, subpoint A and subpoint B of popularity, my opponent just says, well, the reason that there's more sales is because it's offered for a more amount of time. That's true. There is a more amount of time that pumpkin spice lattes are offered, but the business of Starbucks inherently made that choice on purpose because they knew it would sell better for a longer period of time. Again, the eggnog latte has been discontinued twice. For the past 5 years, it has been discontinued because people just don't enjoy it. Thank you.
I'll start holding it. I'll start the casting spots. Okay, I'll go ahead and start my time now. Since this is my last time speaking around today, so I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you to Madeline for excellent job, and thank you to you guys. Again, it's an honor to showcase what we do, and it's a lot of fun. With this in this speech, I'm going to be going over again the negation side of the arguments, touching on those, moving over to the affirmative to address their arguments once again, and finally, offering up a couple of voters for reasons as to why the negation should win this round. With this, let's talk about my own affirmative case. In my contention 1, pumpkin spice con, subpoint A, I talked to you about the cost. I explained to this difference of 21% to 25% on average more expensive, and then I give you this comparison of about $7.25 for your pumpkin spice latte compared to $5.95 for other lattes. In response to this, my opponent tells you that people are still choosing to buy these pumpkin spice lattes despite the cost. My response to this is, at what cost? At what cost are people then spending this more money? My opponent talks about this idea of enjoyment, but personally, I don't enjoy a negative balance in my bank account. What we can see here is that these cons still exist, and just because it is this $1 more expensive, this is one of the arguments that we can see proves that it is not inherently better at enjoyment in every aspect. People might be willing to pay the extra money, but again, I offer the rebuttal, at what cost are people paying this more money? Then in response to my subpoint B, where I talk about this idea of flavor, I talk about how pumpkin spice has actually no pumpkin, and then I give you some statistics about how only 2% of the real pumpkin is actually used in these lattes. My response is my opponent tells you that eggnog has sugar too, so basically that this is a washed argument. My response to this is going to be that eggnog has less sugar, even if it is just 8 grams, that is still less sugar than the pumpkin spice latte. So again, if we look at this idea of on balance, which is the weighing mechanism my opponent provided, we can see that on balance, eggnog latte does have less sugar in it, and that should be considered a good for the eggnog latte. However, what my opponent doesn't respond to, though, is this idea about the ingredients. My opponent only attacks this idea about the sugar, but doesn't attack the idea that pumpkin spice latte doesn't actually have any pumpkin in it, and this is one of the reasons it is not going to be better. As I talked about in my first speech, eggnog lattes have actual eggnog, meaning that when you're actually craving eggnog latte, you're craving the eggnog, not actual artificial ingredients and things such as sugar. So this argument is still going to flow through. Then in response to my subpoint C about this idea of health, my opponent again just responds in that eggnog has sugar too. What we can see here is that pumpkin spice lattes on balance are going to be worse for your health. Again, 50 grams of sugar is more than recommended that you should eat in a day. So when you start your day with a pumpkin spice latte, that should be your limit for sugar for the whole day. Now, moving on to my second contention, where I talk about this idea of them being equal, my opponent responds to this saying that this is because of enjoyment, why the pumpkin spice latte is going to be better. My response to this, again, is going to be this idea of time. What we can see is that the success of the pumpkin spice latte is contributed to the amount of time it is offered. So this argument still stands. Starbucks themselves is inherently better. The choice depends on personal preference of flavor. So that argument is still going to show through. Again, people prefer different things. That doesn't mean that I'm better than someone else just because I prefer a different drink. Now, let's move over to the affirmative side of the flow. My opponent's first contention talk about this idea of popularity, and I respond to this talking about the different times that they are offered. Then my opponent responds to this in our last speech, talking about this is the business of Starbucks, and this was their personal choice. However, what we can see though is that if Starbucks did offer the eggnog latte more, what we can see is that they would likely see the same success of the pumpkin spice latte. So just because Starbucks currently has made this decision doesn't mean that we couldn't see the same success if they did the same thing with the eggnog latte. And then in response to my opponent's second contention, I'm going to respond with the CNN article where I talk about people aren't craving the actual flavor, they're craving the sugar. My opponent doesn't really respond to this idea, so this is going to flow through. This taste argument isn't really going to show why one is inherently better. So with the understanding of all these arguments, let's move over to a couple of voters or reasons as to why the negation should win this round. Our first voter, you've heard me talk about it a lot, is going to be this idea of time. What we can see is that the success of pumpkin spice lattes are directly contributed to the amount of time that they're offered. As something is more readily available, people are going to be able to have access to it more. It's going to be sold more, people are going to get it more, and people likely are going to seek it out more. What we can see though is, as I've talked about specifically from the source of the kitchen, they see that if we saw the same success and the same means of availability with the eggnog latte, they would likely have the same amount of success. Then my second voter is going to be the weighing mechanism of today's round, looking at this on balance. What we can see is that on balance, more often than not, you can see that pumpkin spice lattes are not better than eggnog lattes. We see the direct cons of these pumpkin spice lattes, and we also see this idea that instead they might be equal. One is not inherently better than the other, especially when we look at it through that value then of enjoyment. You can enjoy both drinks. They're both seasonal drinks. And just because we can see there's more success with the pumpkin spice latte, doesn't mean it's better.
As this is the last speech of the round, I just want to extend a thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you so much for coming in and hanging out with us today. All right, now I still stand in firm affirmation of the resolution that pumpkin spice lattes are better than eggnog lattes. So let's start off first with some voting issues, and we'll cover some of the points that my opponent has made therein. Starting first, we're going to start with the voting issue number 1 of sales. So this is an important issue of sales that is going to be important in the round, which is why it's an issue. All right, so my opponent has talked about this idea first, about how it is slightly more costly to get these pumpkin spice lattes. And they say, at what cost? $1, as my opponent has stated. The cost is $1. And we can see that it's not that much of a difference. And people are more often than not choosing to spend that $1 to have a higher taste profile, to have more enjoyment, and to be a part of that culture of the hashtag PSL. People are choosing to spend that $1. That's not a negative impact on the enjoyment of the drink itself. In fact, spending that $1 helps with your enjoyment. Now, additionally, under this idea of sales, my opponent has said that the success of the pumpkin spice latte is only due to the amount of time that it's offered, and this is their voting issue as well. And we can see, yes, eggnog lattes are restricted more because they just don't sell as well. Again, they've been discontinued twice, once for 5 years, which has been the last 5 years until this December. So they just don't do as well. So of course they're not offered as long because, again, as we talked about in my first point, they're more expensive to make, they're more costly, etc. And so they're not offered as long. But pumpkin spice lattes are offered longer because they make more sales and they have that special pumpkin spice latte day. Now next, let's go for voter issue 2 of enjoyment. My opponent has talked a lot about how there's slightly more sugar in the pumpkin spice latte, how it's slightly worse for your health. But when we're talking about the value of enjoyment, people enjoy sugar. That is just a fact of life. And people really enjoy that pumpkin spice latte, even if it is slightly more sugary than that eggnog latte. Again, we can see that it is the most popular seasonal drink at Starbucks. It has $1.1 billion in sales just this year, bigger than the GDP of some nations. And we can see that it has millions of hashtags across the internet. All of this shows us that on balance, people are enjoying that Starbucks or whatever coffee shop pumpkin spice latte more often than not, because it is better than that eggnog latte. Thank you.
Well, thank you to our debaters once again. That was. And thank you so much for everyone being here today. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and see our incredible debaters. Stop with this. I would like to take a chance and say thank you so much to our incredible coaches. It could not have happened without your guidance as well as without your side eye when we got them behind us. So therefore, once again, thank you for everyone being here today with us in person. Thank you for being with us virtually, and we truly appreciate you being here. If you have any questions or maybe you're interested in joining the team after our showcase, please direct yourself to Riley or Coach Mike Ingram, and they will explain to you any other stuff that you need. So thank you so much once again, and we appreciate you all.